everybody. Welcome back to Redemption Thursdays with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. I'm Yehuda Shemroth. I live in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel. We are live on Facebook and also on Israeltorah.org on a YouTube channel. So I can send the link to people if they're interested, and please pass this on to your friends that Rabbi Winston speaks nearly every single week about all topics having to do with Jewish history, Jewish contemporary issues. The Geula Shalema was what we're interested in at the moment, and how to prepare ourselves. The rabbi is on a series right now, and I'm going to just look at the exact name because I never get it right. In Search of My True Self. He also has a website, 36.org. Please pass that on to all your friends. I have a WhatsApp group we started for Rabbi Winston for his weekly Parsha Hashavua, called Perceptions. And Rabbi, I just want to tell you that I'm not getting the extended one anymore. I fell off your radar, so I'm going to resubmit that. I used to get two different ones from you, right? Are you still just? No, I'm not. I don't know. I forget until Shabbos comes and then I forget. So anyway, so please look for all his numerous books on every possible topic, and learning and teaching and webinars on every single topic you could want to know about the Geula and about Jewish history and different things, Kabbalistic things too, like reincarnation. It was fascinating to learn all of his teachings. And Rabbi has a new book right now, which is not Don't Panic. Not Don't Panic, right? Will you please tell us the name of your new book?
What? Sorry?
The name of your new book, and tell us a few minutes about that so people can.
It's called Run, Pain, Run, and it is about how many decisions we make in the course of our day and our life to avoid pain, regardless of the long-term consequences. But more importantly, it discusses the primordial origin of pain, and the last chapter is about laughter.
Wonderful. Well, we need to do that too.
Thank you, Rabbi. The Kabbalistic basis of laughter.
Oh, I had anything to do with Parsha a couple weeks ago. I read your Parsha. It was brilliant.
It is tied
into it over to many people, and they loved it too. Okay, Rabbi, thank you. Without further ado, please take over, and we'll see you at the end.
Actually, at first I thought I didn't know where I left off, so I meant to put a bookmark, and apparently I did put a bookmark, so I'm actually able to not have to repeat myself too much. So we're talking about the brain. We're trying to understand how the whole system works, how our thoughts work, and how people struggle to have control over their lives. They struggle to control over their emotions. We can't control the situation that much because Hashgacha Pratit, divine providence, is a major part of it all. And as much as people try to control their world, very often it doesn't work. And if they somehow manage to do it, it's usually at the cost of something else. For example, a person is afraid of being hurt all the time, so they might avoid relationships. But relationships are the meat and potatoes of life, and part of the expression, but you can't live without them. So this is an ongoing struggle that people have. Is it we lose people along the way, and it makes some people feel it's not worth it to happen in the first place because the pain of the loss. But that's not the way life works. But the point is that we can't really control the world around us so much. So there's some famous expression that comes to mind. I think it's something that someone said at some point in time, that when we cease to be able to control ourselves, then we try to control. Since we cease to be able to change ourselves, we then start to change the world around us. Something to that effect. Maybe the opposite even. But the point is that the only things that we really can work on are ourselves. And it's an ongoing avoda, it's an ongoing project. We are born into this world, and people just live, whatever comes up, whatever they're told, and then they follow a pattern. But the result often is underachieving. Most people greatly underachieve. They have no idea what they're capable of doing, and that's where nisyonos come in, divine tests and crises. All these things come in, and really, that's what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is a divinely ordained crisis. It's a crisis. Why is it a crisis? Because it doesn't have to be a crisis. People downplay it, but basically it's a crisis because it forces a person to have to respond, in a situation that they otherwise might have avoided. So, for example, when my alarm clock goes off in the morning, I have a crisis. Do I get out of bed in the morning or do I sleep in? Right? And I have to respond to that. And the decision I make helps to define me. And then I have to daven, and I have to put on my tefillin. Do I just whip them on and take them off, and just like basically barely pay attention to it, just knowing that I've done the mitzvah, or do I take time to put them on with kavanah, with intention and sincerity, and feel my heart involved in all of this, and my tefillah too? Do I just do what the words say and get out of there as fast as possible, or do I put myself into it? It's not easy to do it day after day, 3 times a day especially. But these are all crises that Hashem has created. But what they do is they force us to examine ourselves. That's why the Hipalel is reflexive, because basically when we dive into Hashem, He knows He doesn't need us to pray to Him. In fact, He knows what we need to pray for before we even know that we need to pray for it. But it helps us to get a better glimpse of our inner core, our inner being, to be able to know where we need to improve, what we can enhance, and how to fix things up so that we can get more out of life. But some people do the soul searching, but most people just on automatic pilot. They go with the flow, and it's all levels of society, all aspects of society. But some people, you see individuals who that's not good enough, and they want more. And everybody should, especially we've been given the Torah to help us get that more. So this is all part of that process. So we are now in a section called human computer. We're dealing with the brain. To begin with, the brain is just a computer, fleshy and filled with a ton of gray matter, but a computer nonetheless. It contains an incredible amount of data, some accessible at will, some only accessible in certain circumstances. But like any other computer, the brain is filled with all kinds of information to help us to live, while providing us an opportunity to do something, with the knowledge itself. It is a device we use to survive and accomplish. Who? That's really the question, right? Who is using our onboard computer? That depends. It depends upon the person and the circumstance, because some people, like tzaddikim, know and understand themselves well enough to deny or at least limit the Yetzer Hara's access of the brain. That's really the point over here. This is why there's so much confusion, as we mentioned before, that we're not the only ones using our brain. The same way, for example, you could have a computer in an office that you think is yours, only to come and find someone else sitting at the desk working on it. They have their own file. They have their own part of the disk that is closed off to them and is private, and we're sharing it. But it's each time that we're sitting down, we're working with it, and it's helping us. So the same things with the brain. So for others who do not, they have to struggle and fight to take control of their brain away from the Yetzer Hara. As Arizal said, for some, the Yetzer Hara is the Bala bias. In other words, this goes back at the beginning. You have to understand how we got the Yetzer Hara in the first place, because man was not created with the Yetzer Hara. He was created without the Yetzer Hara, as the Ramchal explains in Derech Hashem, that the very first man, in fact, the very first sin ever committed was unique and never repeated again in the way that it actually occurred. Why is that? Because every other sin ever committed by mankind has always involved the Yetzer Hara. I don't think there's any exception to the rule. Because since it's part and parcel of who we are, it's going to be involved on some level. If a person's doing a chet, it might just be a very innocent sin, so to speak, where a person wastes time. I say innocent because they're not doing anything that the Torah is that bad, but that's also called a sin, and it may be laziness, and it's a laziness that may come from the Yetzer Hara. How many times have we decided to take a break, only to realize we didn't have that time to take the break, and as a result of that, we start to panic, and we wish that we had gotten up at that time to do what had to be done. Yetzer Hara gets in the way, but Adam Rishon did not have a Yetzer Hara. In the beginning, in fact, the Yetzer Hara was not even in the Garden of Eden. According to Kabbalah, even the snake himself was not yet the Yetzer Hara. It was a sequence of events. It's a little bit complicated, worth a discussion unto itself. But the point is, when Adam did when he actually sinned, it was literally an intellectual mistake. it was a miscalculation. The word chet, they like to point out, especially in Kiruv, right, doesn't really mean sin. It's from a word that means to miss your target. So really, you want to do the right thing, but you missed. So some people miss a lot, and it becomes an ugly situation from a Torah perspective. But the idea of missing your mark usually is like, again, an archer is aiming for something, and he shoots at the target, and he misses. Maybe it's another tree instead, right? He didn't do anything wrong. It's just that he was off in his aim. So that's how they refer to sin, but that's not really the way it works for most of us. We might miss the target, but it's because of an influence. Adam Arishon didn't have that influence. It was pre-chet, pre-nachash. Now what happened was that he made his mistake intellectually, and after that lowered the world that already had an impact on creation. It lowered the spiritual. In the beginning, the angels thought that Adam himself was an angel. That's how spiritual he was. His head was his brain was so spiritual that basically he wasn't really from the physical world per se. His body was already more physical. And as a result of his mistake, the worlds began to lower already, and he become more physical. As the Zohar points out, that in the beginning we had kasnos or, which means clothing of skin of light, because the word or is spelled aleph vav reish, which means light, and the transformation was to kasnas or with an ayin. Ayin vav reish means skin, which is what we have right now. It's also called mishka dechivia, right? It's called the clothing of the snake, right? Or the skin of the clothing of the snake, or the skin of the snake, because he caused this to happen. And what's interesting is how this transformation to the skin, the only animal that I'm aware that sheds its skin, and they're still not 100% sure as to why it happens that way, right? We have to change our tires in our car every once in a while because the treads wear down, but the snake can actually have the same skin its entire life, but somehow once a year, I think it sheds its skin. It takes a while, it's a painful process, but the point is that the snake at that point was actually, the Gemara says, the snake was a good guy. He was meant to be like a butler. He was meant to be Adam's right-hand man, to serve him in the Garden of Eden, right? And instead, what happened when Adam made his mistake and caused the world to become more physicalized, so then the Sitra Achra, which is like we call him the Satan, English they translate as Satan, but it's an angel. The word Satan means obstruct, and he exists in order to make it possible that man should be challenged. So he's a tempter. He's called the tempter because he creates situations that appeal to the Yetzer Hara to force us to will ourselves to do the right thing and earn schar, reward in the world to come. So it says at that time, then the Sitra Achra went into the snake, spiritually speaking, took it over, right? Like a dibuk. That's really what it was, like a dibuk. The snake lost his free will, and he had free will. The snake lost his free will. At that point, the snake no longer was talking on his own. When the snake talking to Chava in the Garden of Eden, that's not the Sitra Achra dressed up as the snake talking to Chava, trying to convince her to eat, but not the snake. But that's the result. And at that point in time, but still, at least it's separate. When Chava, even she may not have realized that the Sitra Achra was inside the snake, but she did know the snake was talking to her. There was no internal Yetzer Hara at that point in time, though she was already being affected by it. But when she knew, right, it wasn't using her brain. She was using her brain, but he convinced her. He made her make a mistake because already the world had been transformed by Adam's original act that led to this downfall of creation and the physicalization that led to the Yetzer Hara. But that's the way it was in the beginning. And then after that, right, Cain and Hevel were born from them in the Garden of Eden, not outside, but in the Garden of Eden. But since Adam and Chava had already been affected by the snake, they had this, what we call zuhama. They had this very strong, indelible impurity in them. So when they conceived Cain and Hevel, they were born with a combination of Adam's purity and the effect of the snake, which meant effectively that they had their own Yetzer Hara. They were born with an internal onboard Yetzer Hara. They were the first ones. Cain and Hevel, which explains why Cain murders Hevel. And Hevel wasn't killed for no reason. Hevel also made a mistake. He looked at the fire coming down to burn up a sacrifice, and became worthy of death at that point in time. But the point is that was the induction of the Yetzer Hara into the history of mankind, into mankind himself. So in the beginning, Adam didn't have that. So he made his mistake purely by making a miscalculation. But after that, every other chet after that involves the Yetzer Hara, even by Chava, this Taki the Yetzer Hara. So we need both. Okay, circumstance plays a role as well, because some talk more to the Yetzer Hara, some circumstances. Then circumstance plays a role as well, because some talk more to the Yetzer Tov, our essential self and soul, than the Yetzer Hara, and others just the opposite. For example, if you go to a shul, you go to a simcha, you go to a hospital even, right? As Shlomo Melech said, better to go to a base avelis than to a mishteh, right? Better to go to a house of mourning than to a bar, to a party, a simcha. Why? You see, because when a person goes to nachem somebody in shiva, life is very serious. You're not so, the levity is reduced, and your sense of carelessness is reduced. But when a person goes someplace and they're having fun, having a good time, even at a wedding, a bar mitzvah like that, the conversation changes, the lifestyle changes. People become looser with their morality as a result of that. So it's better. It's not the happiest thing. It may sound depressing, but if you want to get to Shemaim, you want to get to Olam Haba with as few averos as possible, you want to be in circumstances that support that. So you're going to shul, going to the basement. The Gemara says, right? If a person's walking along the street and they bump into a maneuver or somebody that they don't like, meaning they get tempted by the Yetzer Hara to do something, drag it to the base medrash. If it's made from stone, it'll break into pieces. If it's made from metal, it'll spark and melt, basically. In other words, the Torah itself, meaning if a person goes into a place of kedusha, of holiness, that will talk to the Yetzer Tov and bring out the Yetzer Tov. But if a person goes someplace, even just to a shopping mall, right? Any place where, especially if it's a secular place where they're not interested in morality, on the contrary, they're pushing their products. They want to make as much money as possible. They're talking to the Yetzer Hara. You don't sell too many products online in stores if you're talking to the Yetzer Tov. A Sforim store that's selling, Torah books is usually just for people who are looking for those Sforim. But people who are interested in pleasing the Yetzer Hara, they don't go there. They go instead shopping for clothing, go to restaurants. That brings out the Yetzer Hara. So this is a major part that affects, and that's what, and that, the Gemara talks about these things all the time, about whether or not, to go a certain path it will test you, or whether you should avoid it altogether. And the reality is it says, and then this is an ongoing problem through history, because the Zohar, the expression, the Lashon uses is a person should not be nichtas b'nesuim below reshus, meaning that a person should not create a situation of test for themselves. Should not put themselves in a situation where it talks to the Yetzer Hara as much as possible, that they shouldn't do this, because you just don't know your strengths. You just don't know how smart and clever the Yetzer Hara can be, and how easily it can rationalize. And if you're somebody who doesn't even know your Yetzer Hara so well, you don't recognize it so well, it's very easy to think that you're the one who wants the thing, until, of course, after, when morality kicks in and conscience kicks in, and that wasn't me. I shouldn't have done that. What was I thinking? Right? So as expression goes, you don't go to a wedding on an empty stomach if you're trying to stick to your diet. I mean, it's a classic, situation. A person, you're trying to lose weight and you're on a diet. It's not easy to do that, especially around people who are always eating. But at least in your house, in your office, you can come prepared. You can avoid, the lunchroom when everyone else is eating. There's ways to get around it. You go to a chasana. It's not just the food, but it's also the atmosphere. The quality of food itself is tremendous. So as a result of that, a person, you go on an empty stomach, you can say to yourself, no, I'm not going to eat that much. I'm going to go, but I'm going to watch what I eat very hard. So some people can. Some people are disciplined enough, right? But the better advice is to eat a nice leafy vegetable salad before you go and kill your appetite. So this way, you may say, "Oh, I wish I wasn't so full," but that's now. Later on, you'll say, "Oh, I'm so glad I was," because that way I can walk away not feeling guilty for having eaten food I didn't need and didn't want. So this is a metaphor for all of life. It works the exact same way. So we need both the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara for free will. The problem is, since they share the same brain, they battle for computer time. Right? It's ongoing the entire time. The bigger problem is that it is too easy for a person to think that they want to do the morally corrupt thing, since the command comes in the same brain that decides to do the morally correct things. One computer, one brain, and they share it. It's not you. It's not the mind. The mind is a whole different thing. It's a whole different level of reality. The brain is just a physical, very, very incredible and mysterious physical, thing, but it works for both the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. The Chafetz Chaim got up early against the advice of his Yetzer Hara via his brain, but how many others hit the snooze button instead, thinking it's what they really want to do? So the Chafetz Chaim, he had no shaila. The story told about how he said, if you're up this early, there's no reason why I shouldn't be up this in the morning. The Chafetz Chaim, he recognized, he knew, I didn't get up, I didn't set my alarm for this time in the morning, if he in fact had used the alarm, right? Because I wanted to sleep in. I may feel like that right now. My Rosh Hashiva always say, are you doing what you want to do, or what you feel like doing? I thought they were the same thing. No, they're not the same thing necessarily. It is nice when they are, right? That's a disciplined person. That's a smart person when they both line up. But very often, most people tend to do what they feel like doing, thinking it's what they want to do. So then why doesn't the soul scream out and say, no, don't do that? Because it's so covered over. Layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. Very often in Kiruv, they try to makarv some, they try to influence a person to stay in yeshiva to learn a bit more about Torah. They're talking about this diamond that's covered up by layers of dust. And the brightest light in the world, if you cover it up enough, and in fact, that's exactly what Hashem did, because His light, His infinite light, His incredibly awesome, infinite, imperceptible light runs from the top of creation all the way down to the bottom. It's in our world too. So why can't I see it? Because it's layer upon layer upon layer. As the light starts off, it has very few layers. So as a result of that, nothing physical can exist. Nothing can exist. Not even angels can exist at that level. But Hashem wants things to exist. He wants the world to exist. He wants people to have free will to choose to see Him, to work on themselves and to elevate themselves to become closer to Him. So that requires a world with less light. But the core light stays the same. So how can you have that? So the answer is, it's like the same thing. When you're sitting inside your house, wearing, your just a shirt, and your clothing. So then, basically, that you can see more of you, right? You can relate to the person more, right? If a person decides to get, it gets cold, they put on a sweater. The sweater covers up them some more. If it gets really cold, if they go outside in the cold weather, they put on a jacket, a coat, a very thick, not even a thick one, a scarf and a hat, and they're all covered up. The essence of who they are is still there. It's inside. Nothing has changed on the inside. The core, the person, is the same person they were when they're just wearing a shirt. But they add layers to it. So the same thing is true. In our world, Hashem down, the lower the light went down, the more layers went on top of that. So eventually the light gets so covered up that people can actually doubt whether or not God exists or runs the world. Even though their soul is the very light that they doubt. And the world they're looking at exudes the reality of God. But He does such a good job. And this is what we call Hester Panim. The hiding of God's face. The hiding of God's face, God says, if you're not going to listen to me, if you're not going to walk in the path of Torah, then I'm going to turn my face away from you. But that's just a euphemism. It's a metaphor to say I'm going to add more layers to the light. And then it'll really become difficult to see me, and then you're really going to stumble, and make mistakes in life, and it's going to cost you terribly. So, a person has to strip away these layers, which is what Torah comes to help us do, to get to the core. And then this is what happens, when a person goes from being secular to Baal Tshuva, the greatest sense of accomplishment of all of it is how much better you get to know yourself as a result of it. because you can't believe how many layers of thought and image that we pile on our soul until we look in the mirror and we see something that's not really who we are. But as you start to learn truth, and you go deeper into it, well, this doesn't matter, this doesn't matter, and I don't need this, and this image doesn't count anymore. You take them off one by one, you get down to the core, which is what we're trying to do here. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So, not only that, but the brain is a camera, recorder, and massive data center. It takes a picture of almost everything we see and records everything we hear, smell, taste, and feel. Then it stores all of it away for future reference, cataloging it for future access. The process is so automatic that we rarely know what is happening and can end up recalling things that we'd much rather forget. In the Sefer Shorsha Avoda, he speaks about this. He talks about how careful, halavai, that's what we should all do, but how careful one has to be, because even if you look at something, you see something, you're exposed to something that not really the worst thing in the world, but it becomes a bad thing if it happens to be that during Shmona Esrei, when you're standing before God and you're at the level of Atzilas, one of the highest levels you can possibly get to in existence, and you're there in Shemona Esrei, and you're trying to have it, focus your attention on God only, and all of a sudden, this horse and wagon comes across your imagination. It's an interruption. It's a distraction, and it's inappropriate, and it could be an avera. It can lead to more distraction. So this was going on the entire time. Our brains, even though we can't consciously remember everything we see, we can't consciously remember most things we see, but it's in the brain. And that's why it's an amazing thing, how these random thoughts, if you look up online, and look about random thoughts and how the whole thing works, basically, the brain just throws them at you. Now, sometimes the brain just might be taking out the garbage, getting rid of a bunch of stuff that we don't need. But a lot of times it's because there's trigger words. Everything is cataloged. The same way, for example, you're searching online for something, right? There are tag words. The point of a tag word is that there's a reference point. So if I'm looking up something, the computer, the internet can identify ideas that are connected to what I'm looking for, and then throw them onto the screen so I can make a choice about which one might be relevant to me. And it's absolutely amazing how accurate it can be, and also how inaccurate it can be sometimes. But compared to what it was like 35, 40 years ago, huge difference. The brain's the same way. You can hear something, you can see something, you can think of something for one moment. I mean, how many, call it train of thought. But just speaking personally, I mean, there's many times that I have basically been in Shemona Esrei, davening, thinking I'm having kavanah, trying to have kavanah, right? And I'll hear something in the background. Someone's talking in the hallway or outside, or you hear a truck, make a noise or something like that. And that noise triggers some type of memory because it's tied to something that happened to you in your lifetime, which leads to another thought, and literally after about 10, 15 seconds, there's a famous story of the Chavetz Chaim, who once, when a bocher stepped out of Shemona Esrei, he wished him Shalom Aleichem. I don't know if the story is true and how he saw it, but he wished him Shalom Aleichem. I mean, more than likely that the bocher finished Shemona Esrei before the Chavetz Chaim did, so I don't know how he saw it. But anyhow, the story is the story. The point is the point. He says, Rebbe, what's Shalom Aleichem for? He says, when someone goes around the world, they come back, you wish them Shalom Aleichem. I saw that clearly that's what you just did. By going to the Shemesri, your mind was someplace else completely. Now, again, I don't know if that story is true, if the Chavetz Chaim would ever do a thing like that, or somebody else, but it is true. How many times you can, you don't even know it, by the way. So many times that you just step in and you daven and your mind wanders, and you somehow are able, because you're maybe looking to sitter, or you just half and half, and you're focused enough to be able to get to the Shemona Esrei without losing your spot, right? But there's times when a phone has gone off for 1 second. And it happens almost every day, except on Shabbos, phone goes off, and for that 1 second you hear the phone, and you think to yourself, a phone went off, and I forgot exactly where I was, and I thought I was having a lot of kavanah, like literally forgot, like not even a hint. So then where was my mind? I thought it was there. I thought it was in Shemona Esrei. That's the way the brain works. right? So you have to really focus and be, and that's why some people, says that when Rabbi Kiva used to daven, he used to shackle so much, he was starting at one end of, the base medrash and end up in another end. Watch out, don't be in line of his path that he's davening. I don't know if it means that literally exactly like that, but some people get very physically involved into tefillah. They wave their hands and they wave their hands around, and they do all, because they're struggling. In fact, this is a very important part, even by learning, right? Learning, they always make jokes about how people in the base measure, their thumbs and like this, and their hands are moving, they're walking, pacing back and forth, pacing back and forth, right? Why is it like that? You go to a library, right, and people are sitting at tables and desks and cubicles and whatever, very quietly doing their work, research and writing things down, but it's quite, you can't make noise, you can't do things like that. You become a distraction, get kicked out. It's just the opposite of the base medrash. As Brewer told some Talmidim who are learning quietly to themselves, you're not going to last. That's not the way Torah is supposed to be learned. So why is it that people who learn Torah seriously, then they get so incredibly involved in their learning? For the same reason. Because memory improves based upon how many senses are involved in the learning process. So if you're just sitting and reading with your eyes and your brain, it's very hard to be focused. You're hearing things with your ears, right? You might even have a taste in your mouth, might be smelling something or not, but you're just not completely there. You might think you're completely there, right? When a Rebbe starts to talk and he's monotonous, he's monotone voice, and he's not excited, he's just giving the material over dry, then the students they might sit there and listen, and they think they're there, and he thinks that they're there because they're looking at him, but their brain might be already at recess and going home on a trip they're going to have. Shabbos is coming up, and this happens so unconsciously. And in the secular world, obviously you want to remember your knowledge, but it's not life and death. Not usually life and death. I mean, people cram for exams and forget it 2 weeks later. People learn things and forget most of it, because the world will teach them anyhow. But by Judaism, by Torah, it says that if a person learns something and they forget it, it's a terrible thing. I won't tell you what it says about it because it's a little scary, but it's terrible. You have to remember, right? As the Gemara says, you go to Shemayim with Torah biyado, with Torah in your hand, the Torah that you learned and that you remembered, and they're going to ask you now. So there's story about what happens at death and after death, and how you're tested to see how much you learned it. So there's a huge emphasis on learning Torah and keeping it. People used to chazer, every 40 days, all their learning. They used to review it every 40 days. There's such a huge emphasis on remembering it. And since that's the case, so you need to feel attached to it. Some people have memory devices and experiences, because you see in life, right? What are the things you remember the most and the longest? The fun things? Not really so much. Interesting enough, you can recall them sometimes. Someone can remind you of them, but the happy, those happy. How many of those experiences do you remember from your childhood and growing up? But trauma, right? Some traumatic experience that person had when they were young, they can see as clear as day like it happened yesterday. Why? Because that's what trauma does. It involves all the senses. It's so absorbing. Something happens that's shocking, and you can remember, I was sitting at a table doing X, Y, and Z because every part of you got pulled into the moment. So when someone is learning and they really want to remember it, they need to involve as many of their senses as possible. It's automatic. They don't even think about it. It just happens because the emphasis on trying to focus is so strong that it automatically draws in the other senses. So you start walking around, you start getting more, start getting all of you into it. Because the more of you that's into it, that's why teachers, for example, who dramatize the learning, find out, they themselves or the material itself, or some presentation that really is gripping, right? That education, I mean, I can remember things from 40 years ago because of certain teachers. Certain teachers I can remember, I can't remember a thing they taught me. But other teachers, I remember what they taught me because they were somebody who they had impact. They in the moment. And this is something that we can use to our advantage. But the amazing thing is that the brain itself is automatically recording everything. Just like, for example, in a computer, there's all kinds of latent information. There's information in your computer base you may have no idea about, but if you press the right word, the right keyword, it'll show up. Same thing. When a person has all this information inside of them and some experience comes along that triggers it, they'll have this thought, and they won't necessarily be conscious of it. They'll ask themselves, like, where'd that come from? Where'd that thought come from? Where'd that idea come from? Gee, I wish I'd think of that thing. And I was like, boy, I haven't thought of that for a long time now. I wonder what triggered that. So, association, right? And it works by the brain itself works by indiscriminate association, meaning that it doesn't care if it conjures up a thought or image we'd rather it didn't. Its job is to make the connection. The brain doesn't have a sense of morality. That's up to us, right? The brain is like a computer. You ask a computer a question, if it has the answer, it gives it to you, good or bad. Doesn't have built-in morality, right? So, same thing is true of the brain, right? It's Then there's what we call train of thought. A person can start off consciously thinking about something, but then the brain will connect it to something else because of some kind of association. I mean, how many times does it happen? Where you end up with some kind of thought, and you say, gee, how did I get to that? Where'd that come from? And you go back and you think, well, that thought was from that thought, and that thought, oh wow, that came from wondering about this thing, which I wanted to think about, but look what it led to in the end. That's the brain. You have to know how the brain works, right? At some point along the intellectual journey, a person usually becomes conscious of what's happening and stops it. But it may already be after having recalled things that you'd hoped to forget completely. This is why Chazal placed such an emphasis on zahirus, carefulness. One of the first gate, I believe, of Mesilas Yesharim, the Ramachal speaks about. There are 10 gates, 10 chapters in Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just. They say that the next one is Ruach HaKodesh, because even the Gemara mentions that Ruach HaKodesh, which is prophecy for all intents and purposes, is to make you into a prophet, not the one that you can bank in the local bank, but the one that you can talk to God, understand, have a spiritual connected far beyond your physical capability, and Zahirus he brings down is the first thing. Because you're creating an environment, if not just a physical environment, but an intellectual environment as well. The best way to make sure that crazy thoughts don't invade your mind is by not being exposed to them in the first place. It doesn't matter if we approve of something or not. If it catches our attention, it makes a roshim, an impression. And this idea of roshim, they say you only get one shot at a first impression, right? But the idea of a roshim is a hugely Kabbalistic concept, even though we use it in life all the time. You left a good impression, that left an impression upon me. But and what do we mean by that is that even though the thing is finished, it's gone, it was moved on, but it still stays with me. So we have all these impressions we're walking around with all the time. So you have to limit what is going to impress you, so to speak, what's going to leave an impression upon you. But when God made the world, that's exactly what He did it. There was an impression, the light came in, left an impression, and from that impression, the rest of creation was made. So, if it catches our attention, it makes a roshim, an impression. And though roshim can fade from short-term memory, just making corrections as I go along here, right? It remains in the long-term memory for the rest of a person's life. And you'll forget about it in the meantime. And the thing was impression, but it's there. It's inside. Ready to be accessed when the opportunity arises. The more emotional an experience is, the greater the roshim it makes, as trauma makes clear. The more senses involved in an experience, the greater the roshim it leaves. This is great when it comes to things we want to remember, terrible when it comes to things we'd rather forget. So, So I'll just have an example here, but I think maybe we'll just skip it for now. Okay. The Yetzer Hara is like that. No, I guess I can't because the material is based upon it. Here's the story. A man was enjoying a business lunch with a client in a fine restaurant when a loud and less refined relative of his came in and spotted him. Calling to him from across the restaurant, he had to respond to his relative and at least appear as if he was not embarrassed while the rest of those dining looked on. He just kept reminding himself that even though they were from the same family, they were not the same person. This allowed him to gracefully suffer his humiliation, which impressed those around him. So the Yetzer Hara is like that loud, unrefined relative. It is physical and instinctual, a product of this physical world. It wants things that provide physical pleasure and often regardless of any consequences. It lives for the moment and lacks any inspiration to be anything more than what it already is. It has no ambition, no spiritual ambition. It's like this. It's like a child. I want now. This feels good. This tastes good. This is going to give me, gratification. Forget about the consequences. Lacking any real sense of conscience or shame, it can think about anything that comes to its mind. Loud relatives at family events is much less of a problem. Everyone knows who is who and expects certain behavior from certain people. If you know somebody is a certain way, that's them and not you. Even if you're related, even if they're connected to you, but you're different. So therefore you can make that distinction. It's not the same with Yetzer Hara. Unwarranted thoughts are less of a problem while working out in a gym or just walking down a street. But unholy thoughts in a holy place feels like such a violation. Excuse me. And since they come from the person's brain, the person feels ashamed for them. But that itself is the indicator that they are not the source of the thoughts. That's a very important point that people don't realize. They feel the shame of having had the thought, or at least where they had it. For example, if a person's having a what we call a whole conversation, an everyday mundane conversation, but in shul, when during the drasha or just in shul itself or on Yom Kippur, they feel the sense that's not really right. I thought it was okay and I did it anyhow, right? So the fact that you feel bad about it shows you off the bat that's not who you are, and that's important. That's what most important. But that's what we call separation. To make that separation between who you are and what you end up doing, because when you can do that, you can be like the Chafetz Chaim and anticipate and recognize the Yetzer Hara in advance and eventually gain control over it. So the repulsion they feel is real, is their real essential self rejecting the Yetzer Hara's input and complaining about its abuse of the brain. It is the Yetzer Tov saying, I want nothing to do with that kind of thinking, no matter how much it makes the Yetzer Hara happy. I am completely separate from it. And that's the turning point. When a person can get to that point, right, they're beginning to identify with their essential self. So, Bezrat Hashem, we'll go on next week about this, because it goes a little bit deeper. There's more to this, but this is the main thing. This, at least to leave off for the time being, to understand that we have one brain but two koiches, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, and they both vie for computer time. And the trick is to realize that's the case, not to think it's just one person using one brain. So if I have, this is exactly what Freud and people like they were teaching and thought. That if it's coming from me, it must be me. I might not like it, it might seem base, but it's still coming from me, so it must be me. And I have to be careful about how I curb it, because I might cause myself damage. Torah says no. There's, ever since the Ched of Adam Rishon, there's two entities inside of you. There's you, your essential self, and there's the Yetzer Hara. And they're both using the same brain, and it sounds like one voice. But you can tell by what's being said, by what the inspiration is, what the motivation is, which one's which. And once you can make that separation and say, no, that's not me. That thought's not me. My brain can do things like that. It can throw that at me. I can have ideas that I don't, I can reject, and they can still come from the same brain, but it's not me. Then a person, that's the most important turning point to getting control, self-control, and getting to the essence of who you are, and greatly enhance the quality of your life.
Okay, Rabbi, thank you very much. I don't know, maybe anyone else has this question or not, but I'm I'm hearing, and first of all, I'm learning something that I've tried to do a few things while I'm listening to the shiur, and I realize that's not right. I should be sitting in front of the computer and doing that instead of unpacking my dishwasher and getting stuff ready for Shabbos while I'm listening. So that was a good lesson right there. But thank you. But it sounds like you're saying, unless I missed it, like we're really pure and good if we only realized it and we wouldn't do all these things wrong. I know Hasidus talks about that a lot. I've been learning Hasidus for lots of years. But like, where does the responsibility come in then? Like, where is it? If you have a pure thought, it's really not you. If you do a bad thing, it's really not you. Well, it is really you. And so you have to correct those parts of yourself, don't you?
Yes, 100%. Basically, you're saying 2 points here. The very first thing the Arizal says in Shar HaGilgulim, in the first 2-3 paragraphs, it's a very thick, it is a sefer that's got a lot of chapters in it, right, with a lot of information. But the first thing he starts up by saying, you have to know that you are your soul and not your body. And a soul is all good. So the question is, how do we make a mistake? So there is an idea, which we'll get to later on, Bezrat Hashem, the idea that because of the sin of Adam Rishon, our souls became blemished. It became blemished, became damaged. Right. So it's like somebody, for example, who hurts their leg, they're limping, right? So they're a good person, but they have damage now, and it limits how much they can do, how much they're going to help out and things like that, because there's something but damage. So we are here rectifying our souls, but no, 100%, we are in essence only the good. And it does raise the issue about free will and what's the bad and all that. But in a sense, it's a little easier to understand it, let's say a mother and a child, right? The child is a child. The mother, as much as the child comes from the mother, the child is a separate entity. It's only a Tahara, right? It acts out. You can't, there's no question that we feel responsible for our children's behavior, but so much of the time the parents are not their children. The children, you have soul natures that you cannot control. God puts the soul of a child. The parents could be the nicest, sweetest people in the world. And you have a child who's rambunctious and has all kinds of issues. Nonetheless, if that child goes shopping with that parent and that child acts up, the parent feels as if I should have had more control over my child.
Some people tell you should be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But so we have it. Ultimately speaking, and this is what the Gemara means. When it says that God made the Yetzer Hara, made the Torah as its tavlin, as its spice, as we mentioned last week, it's not talking about killing the Yetzer Hara. We're here to refine the Yetzer Hara. We're here to it's like a wild stallion, right? The stallion runs around free. He doesn't want to wear a harness, doesn't want to wear a rein, right? But if you can get that, you can break in that horse, and get it to, in a sense, he's going to accomplish way more meaningful things. He might even save lives in the end, and it helps man to accomplish his purpose as well. So we're here ultimately to use our strengths to overcome the Yetzer Hara for good, not to kill it, to channel it.
Is that possible? That's the question. For good, channel it for good. I mean,
well, the truth is, Judaism is heavily into A is for efforts. And whether we're not, as it says, you're not expected to complete the task, but you're not free to abandon it either. So we're always in the middle of that reality where, just make the effort you can to do the job, and then you get Siyata Shema. Because the Gemara says that Abala Teher Masaino so. So if a person decides they want to do that, they're prepared to do the work and work on themselves, what we're doing here right now, then Hashem will help you with it. And give you the capacity to be able to deal with Yetzer Hara and use it in the proper way. And that's what tzaddikim are. Tzaddikim have a Yetzer Hara too. Gedolei Dor have a Yetzer Hara too. But they just happen to work on themselves so much that they can still make mistakes. They're on a much higher level than our mistakes. They won't do things we do, but they can still make mistakes in what's called an avera for them as well. But they're so good at it. They're so good at what they do. That because ultimately speaking, Moshe Rabbeinu and his body, when he came down to the Malach HaMavos couldn't take his soul. The soul didn't want to leave, and the body didn't want to let go of it, because the body got to the point where it's going to get to Yemos HaMashiach, but he did it through his lifetime. So they're saying, like, why separate us? We already got, you have to separate most people because you have to die first and then come back in resurrection of the dead, but we're already there, right? That's the level that, David the Melech got this, Yitzchak, Avinu got to these levels, but the main thing is that to make the distinction, understand this, as the Gemara says, the difference between a tzaddik and a rasha is that a rasha falls once and never gets up. A tzaddik falls 7 times and gets up each time. Why? Because he's working on it. He's working on it. And that's the bottom line.
Okay. Thanks, Rabbi. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us once again. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful Shabbat.
Thank you.
Shabbos.
You as well.
And thank you. And everyone else, please join us next week. Rabbi will be continuing this series on trying to find your inner self, your true self. Please look at israeltorah.org. And it's got a wealth of information about Aliyah and about the Geula. Also, there's a lot of great videos there interviewing so many important people and some lesser important people about what the times we're living in right now. And also Rabbi Winston's website, 36.org. Please tell your friends about it, and please pass this around to other people. And this webinar was sponsored by me, Yehuda Shamroth, from the Miriam Project at Geula Hour. You can find it on Facebook, and bringthemhome.org, and Israel 365, and Josh Wander. And please, Hashem, bring our hostages home. They've been over 415, maybe 420 days in hostage situation. And we should bring an end to this war. We should all have a beautiful Shabbat. Thanks for joining, everybody, and see you next week, I hope.